Hello, my name is Sigurt Vitols. I'm the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Technical Expert Group Acting Vice Chair and also a Senior Researcher at the Wissenschaftszentrum Berlin für Sozialforschung. I'm pleased to present to you today an overview of the draft European Sustainability Reporting Standard S1, which covers own workforce. So I was involved in the project task force and then in the EFRAG working group, which helped develop this standard. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the background for this standard. Secondly, I'll give you an overview of the structure of the social pillar, which covers 4 standards. And then finally, I'll give you an overview of the S1 standard itself, own workforce. So a little bit of background. Our work was very much guided by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD. There are 2 articles which are really, really important for guiding what should go in the standard. First of all, there's Article 29A, and that article says that there should be a description of the due diligence process. So this is very much oriented towards international due diligence norms as defined by the UN guiding principles and the OECD guidelines on due diligence. Secondly, companies need to describe their principal, actual, or potential adverse impacts connected with their own operations. And in S1, own workforce, this is very much oriented towards impacts on own workforce and due diligence processes as they relate to own workers. Secondly, there's Article 29B, which states that undertakings should disclose information about a number of social factors. And you can see there's quite a long list of social factors included in 29B. First of all, there's a section on equal treatment and opportunities for all. That includes gender equality and equal pay for equal work, training and skills development, employment and inclusion of people with disabilities, measures against violence and harassment in the workplace, and diversity. Secondly, 29B requires information about working conditions, which includes secure employment, working time, adequate wages, social dialogue, freedom of association, existence of works councils, collective bargaining, information consultation, participation rights, work-life balance, and health and safety. So those are a number of social factors which are roughly based on the European Pillar of Social Rights with different principles, and a few were added by the European Parliament and the Council. But 29B also specifies that there be reporting on the human rights, fundamental freedoms, democratic principles, and standards included in the human rights instruments that you see listed here. So that's the inspiration, the framework for what we looked at for developing the standards. Now I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the social pillar looks like. The social pillar is composed of 4 different standards based on different affected stakeholder groups. You'll see all the way on the left, own workforce, which S1 is based on, but you also have standards for workers in the value chain, affected communities, and consumers and end users. So in our classification, social refers to a topic that's defined in the CSRD, and then we have a number of subtopics based on these affected stakeholder groups. And then finally, we have subtopics and subtopics under that. So these will include all the social matters that I listed before. So there's quite a bit of coordination between these different social standards. In particular, the first 5 disclosure requirements are harmonized between all 4 of these standards. Those 5 are based on international human rights and due diligence standards. Okay, so I'm going to give you now a brief overview of S1 Own Workforce, what's in it. First of all, the standard defines the scope of workers that are included under the standard, and that includes both employees, those are individuals who are in an employment relationship with the undertaking according to national law or practice, which is aligned to the GRI definition of employees, but it also includes non-employee workers. And these are workers who are often involved in the core operations of the company, of the undertaking, and they're essential to the performance of the normal work of that undertaking. And the undertaking has a certain responsibility for these workers in terms of pay, working conditions, equal opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So non-employee workers include two categories. First of all, some self-employed workers. These are individual contractors supplying labor to the undertaking, and also agency workers. These are workers provided by undertakings primarily engaged in employment activities. So that's the type of workers that this standard covers. So I mentioned that the first 5 disclosure requirements in own workforce are harmonized with the other social standards. These are very much based on the OECD and United Nations Guiding Principle standards on due diligence. And that includes, first of all, impacts, risks, and opportunities management disclosure requirements, the first 4, which include policies related to the own workforce, processes for engaging with own workers and workers' representatives about impacts, processes to remediate negative impacts, and channels to raise concerns, and taking action on impacts and approaches to mitigating material risks. So those cover the first 4 disclosure requirements. You can see in the little colored boxes next to each disclosure requirement where the sources for these disclosure requirements are, in all cases, the OECD and the United Nations Guiding Principles are guiding them, but also we have the SFDR, and that's the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which requires that undertakings provide this information in the case of policies and remediation processes. And for the most part, we were able to draw on Global Reporting Initiative disclosure requirements to help us design these. In the middle category, you'll see metrics and targets. And this includes the S1 disclosure requirement. That requires companies to disclose their targets on the material impacts, risks, and opportunities. And I should say that all of these first 5 disclosure requirements are mandatory for companies with more than 250 or more employees, but they only apply to their material impacts, risks, and opportunities as identified through the materiality assessment process. And then finally, in the third column, you'll see additional language, which is supplementing ESRS 2 general disclosures. Firstly, we have ESRS 2 SBM 2, which requires a bit more information on interests and views of stakeholders, in particular worker representatives and own workforce in the IRO assessment process. And secondly, there's additional language on requirements on material impacts, risk, and opportunities. And in particular, there's a reference to child and forced labor. And the undertaking is expected to provide information on high-risk operations in terms of child and forced labor. So in addition to these due diligence-oriented disclosure requirements, S1 Own Workforce, which draws on a long history of reporting on employees and other workers in the own workforce. We have in total, S1 6 to S1 17. We have a number of metrics or KPIs, as they're sometimes called, most of which we're drawing on GRI disclosures, at least to a certain extent. And then we have a category in the left. So that's the disclosure requirements that are mandatory for all undertakings with 250 or more employees. And the first three of these draw on the GRI universal standards, which are also considered by GRI to be mandatory for all undertakings, reporting according to GRI. So these include data points on characteristics of the undertaking's employees, but also S17 requires information on non-employee workers. This is less comprehensive than on employees, but there is an expectation that certain information be provided on non-employee workers. Thirdly, there's disclosure requirements on collective bargaining and social dialogue, which are also covered by GRI and SASB, and on diversity, which includes diversity in terms of female participation in management and the age distribution within the workforce. In the second column, we have what are called disclosure requirements, which are mandatory explanation disclosure requirements. They cover adequate wages and also social protection. So mandatory explanation means that companies are allowed to simply report that they pay all of their own workforce at least an adequate wage, and that they provide social protection in terms of insurance against major risks such as accidents and loss of income during the unemployment, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, in the third column, we have a set of disclosure requirements which are subject to materiality assessment. That means that companies are expected to report on these issues only if these issues are determined to be material in the materiality assessment process. So this includes S112, that's a disclosure requirement which addresses the percentage of workers that have disabilities. There's a training and skills development disclosure requirement, which covers regular career and skill development assessments and the number of hours of training that workers receive on average. There's a number of health and safety indicators, which are required for the most part by the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. And also the ILO defines health and safety as one of the 5 fundamental work-related rights. We have a disclosure on work-life balance. And then we have a number of disclosures on pay inequality, first of all, in the male-female pay gap, and secondly, on the ratio, the so-called CEO pay ratio, which covers the ratio between the highest paid individual and the median pay of people in the undertaking. So these are both required by the SFDR. And then finally, we have a disclosure requirement, S117, which addresses incidents and complaints related to human rights issues. So that in a nutshell is S1 Own workforce and the disclosure requirements contained in it, and the background and the situation in terms of the social pillar. And I thank you very much for your interest and your attention today.